What type of Sagittarius are you? Discover if you are the most powerful version of the Sagittarius sign. Dear Sagittarius, you are not just an explorer of lands and philosophies. You are a sacred flame that has burned through many lifetimes, carrying with it a truth the world has forgotten how to name. Maybe you've spent your whole life being called bold, reckless, too intense, too independent. But has anyone ever truly asked, what kind of Sagittarius are you really? You see, not all Sagittarians are the same. Some are born to travel far, some are sent to teach quietly, and a rare few come to change the collective story without even knowing they are the ones holding the bow of destiny. You, dear soul, may not fit neatly into any description ever written about your sign, because you are not just a fire sign. You are a keeper of sacred memory, a visionary walking between worlds. In this journey, we will uncover the 3 deepest soul archetypes of Sagittarius, the inner maps that guide your fire when the path disappears. This is not to place you in a box, but to remind you of the power you carry and the freedom that lives in your bones. So if you've ever felt like your heart knows something that words can't explain, stay, because your soul is remembering. And before we begin, take a breath, like lighting a flame in your spirit. And if this resonates, share, subscribe, and speak aloud. I, Sagittarius, remember the mission I carry. Gate 1, the Sacred Wanderer. Sagittarius, born to carry fire through the darkness. There is a kind of Sagittarius who is not loud about their fire, not flamboyant in their seeking, but carries the sacred spark of wisdom like a hidden ember cupped between their hands. This kind of Sagittarius may never be understood by the world, not because they are too complicated, but because they refuse to be confined by the ordinary. Since childhood, you may have felt like your spirit belonged somewhere else, somewhere far away. While others clung to comfort, you looked at the open road and felt your soul lean forward. It wasn't always about running away. It was about returning to something the world had forgotten, a truth so ancient that even you couldn't name it yet. In school, maybe you questioned things others accepted. You weren't rebellious for the sake of it. You simply sensed that truth cannot be inherited. It must be discovered. You were never satisfied with shallow explanations. Even as a teenager, there was something in you that pulled away from the crowd, not out of pride, but because you were already listening to something deeper. A whisper from the stars. A longing from a place you couldn't see but always remembered. I once met a Sagittarius woman in her 50s who told me she had lived in 7 countries, changed careers 5 times, and lost more than most people could bear. She looked at me, not with regret, but with eyes so alive it made me pause. They think I'm restless, she said. But the truth is I'm following a promise I made before I was born. I don't know its name, but I know its pull. And in that moment I saw it. This wasn't a woman lost in chaos, but a sacred wanderer. A Sagittarius who had traded stability for the wisdom that only comes through movement, through stepping into the unknown with no guarantee. That is what sets you apart. Your journey is not random, and your fire is not reckless. Your fire is sacred, Sagittarius. It burns for truth, for freedom, and for a kind of clarity that only reveals itself when everything else is stripped away. You've walked away from people you loved because the relationship dimmed your fire. You've taken leaps others called foolish because your soul couldn't breathe inside the boxes others tried to build around you. And yes, there have been moments of doubt. Late nights when you wondered why your life didn't look like anyone else's. Moments where you tried to settle, to belong, to be softer for the sake of love. But those moments always ended in silence and a restlessness that clawed its way back to the surface. Not because you're unstable, but because your soul is loyal to its mission. A Sagittarius who betrays their truth will always feel it in their body first. The headaches, the aching feet, the low-grade anxiety that something essential has been forgotten. You cannot fake a life that is not yours. And even if you try for a while, the call always returns. Sometimes that call comes as an unexpected dream, a sudden urge to move, a knowing in your bones that you need to pack everything and go. You may not always understand it, and those around you may not support it, but this is your soul speaking. This is the sacred rhythm of your incarnation. Not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. You were not born to be understood. You were born to open maps no one else has the courage to read. You are not a follower. You are a seer of new lands, both literal and spiritual. And this world is desperate for people like you. People who are not afraid to break tradition, to speak uncomfortable truths, to walk away from the false lights and head straight into the unknown with nothing but faith and fire in their chest. The Buddha once said, It is better to travel well than to arrive. And Sagittarius, you are the embodiment of this teaching. You know that it's not about the destination. It's about what your soul remembers on the journey. In Christian mysticism, the Magi, often called wise men, were astrologers from the East who followed a star not knowing where it would lead, only that it was holy. That is your lineage. You follow the star not because you are naive, but because you remember a kind of wisdom that predates logic. Every path you've taken, every door you've walked through, even the wrong ones, were not wasted. They were needed. They were altars disguised as detours. And even the pain, the heartbreak, the betrayals, the moments you lost faith were not signs you were off course. They were initiations. Sacred fires to test the strength of your inner flame. And you passed even when you thought you didn't. Because you kept walking. Because you kept seeking. Because something in you refused to give up on the truth, even when the world begged you to settle for the lie. And now here you are. Maybe still wandering. Maybe still unsure. But more awake than you've ever been. Do you feel that? The sense that something is about to open. That all the searching, the trials, the leaving and returning, the questions that never had answers, are now beginning to align. That is not coincidence. That is your soul, Sagittarius. The sacred wanderer who has finally begun to return. Not to a location, but to yourself. So place your hand over your heart. Breathe into it. Whisper softly, I honor the journey that shaped me. And if those words stir something ancient in you, know this: you are not lost. You are arriving. Gate to the fire that survived. Sagittarius, and the sacred endings that transformed you. There is a kind of ending that doesn't arrive with the slam of the door or the echo of goodbye. There is an ending that comes like smoke, slowly, invisibly, until one day you realize you've been breathing in silence and pretending it's air. Sagittarius, you know that ending well. Not just because you've experienced loss, but because you've lived through 1,000 silent deaths, of versions of yourself, of dreams you nurtured alone, of people who once looked at you like you were everything and then forgot how to see you. This gate is about those kinds of endings. The sacred ones. The quiet collapses that shaped you far more than any triumph ever could. For a Sagittarius, endings are not simply closures, they are initiations. Each goodbye has been a fire that either destroyed you or forged you. And the truth is, you have been forged. There were moments when you had nothing left but your name and your feet. Moments when the people you thought would stay didn't. When the path you believed in vanished. When the promise broke and all you could do was walk away. And somehow, despite the grief, despite the ache, you kept moving. Not because it didn't hurt, but because there was something in you more loyal to truth than to comfort. Something in you that understood, even in the deepest pain, that endings are not curses, they are sacred doors. I once met a Sagittarius man in his early 30s, recently divorced, who told me he still couldn't explain why he left the marriage. She was good, he said. She didn't cheat. She didn't lie. But I woke up every day and felt like I was disappearing. He paused, eyes clouded with guilt. I couldn't bear the thought of growing old as a ghost in my own life. That kind of courage isn't celebrated enough. Because walking away from what's safe, not for something easier but for something truer, that is the kind of ending Sagittarius souls must face again and again. You don't chase chaos. But you will not betray your own soul to maintain the illusion of harmony. This sacred fire that burns within you knows the difference between a life that looks good and a life that feels alive. And so you've had to let go of people, of places, of pieces of your identity, not because you didn't love them, but because staying would have meant abandoning yourself. And for a Sagittarius, that is the deepest betrayal. You would rather break your own heart than live a life that is not yours. Of course, not everyone understands this. People see you leave and call you flighty. They misunderstand your desire for growth as a fear of intimacy. They call you reckless when really, you are just devoted to transformation. You have never feared change, you fear stagnation. You fear waking up in a life where your spirit is no longer speaking. So when the call comes to end a chapter, you feel it not in your logic but in your body. A tightening in your chest, a weight behind your eyes, an invisible pull towards something unknown but necessary. And even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything, you go. Because you are not here to preserve the past. You are here to birth the future. Think back, Sagittarius, to the moment you first realized something was over. Maybe it was a job that no longer fit your vision. A friend who began to withhold their joy when you shared yours. A partner who loved the idea of you but not your truth. The ending didn't come with drama. It came with stillness, a knowing. And then came the long silence, the part no one talks about. The months where you questioned yourself. The days when the world praised your strength, but your pillow soaked up your quiet grief. The nights you lay awake wondering, did I make a mistake? Will anyone ever understand why I had to leave? But then something happened. Slowly, as all sacred rebirths do, you started to breathe differently. You woke up and felt just a little more present. You looked at the sky and felt a flicker of gratitude for no reason. You heard your own laugh and thought, I've missed this sound. That is the miracle of your endings, Sagittarius. They don't just take something from you. They return you to yourself. There's a verse in the Tao Te Ching that says, new beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. And Sagittarius, you carry the spiritual blueprint of that truth in your bones. When something falls apart, it doesn't mean you've failed. It means your soul has graduated. You don't outgrow things by accident. You outgrow them because you are meant to evolve. And yes, it can be lonely. You might be the first in your family to speak the truth. The first to walk away from dysfunction. The first to end a toxic pattern that others call tradition. And while they may not see your courage now, the generations that come after you will live in the freedom your fire made possible. In Christian mysticism, the phoenix is more than myth. It is a symbol of Christ-like resurrection. Not born once but reborn through pain. Sagittarius, you are the phoenix. You rise again and again, not because you enjoy burning, but because your soul remembers something more beautiful on the other side. And so you say yes to the endings. You say yes to the shedding. Not because you are fearless but because you are faithful. Faithful to growth, to truth, to the quiet whisper of your higher path. And if right now you find yourself standing at another threshold, not sure if you're ready to let go, not sure if you're strong enough to start again, place your hand over your chest. Feel the fire still burning. It never went out. You just forgot for a while. And that's okay. You don't need to know the next step. You only need to take the first one. Say it softly if it helps. I am not here to repeat. I am here to rise. You are not meant to stay in rooms where your laughter must shrink. You are not meant to remain in stories where your truth must be hidden. If something is ending, let it end. If a chapter is closing, close it with grace. Because what comes next will require your whole self. Not the version of you that pleases everyone, but the one who walks barefoot into the unknown, trusting that light will find you again. And it will, because it always has. Gate 3, the flame that remembers. Sagittarius and the soul bond that never died. Some loves do not arrive with fireworks, but with a whisper so old your soul pauses in recognition. You feel it not in your chest but somewhere deeper, in the space behind memory, beneath logic, beneath timelines. Sagittarius, you have known such a love. Perhaps not with someone you were allowed to keep. Perhaps not even in a way the world would call a relationship. But something in you remembers. You were not dreaming when you felt it. You were remembering what your soul already knew. Sagittarius, you are a traveler by nature. Not just across lands but across dimensions. You walk between the earthly and the divine. And because of this, when love enters your life, it is not casual. You don't fall in love with people. You remember them. You meet their energy before you meet their name. And when that love arrives, it doesn't just stir your heart. It awakens your mission. It reactivates the ancient map encoded in your spirit. But this kind of love is not always easy. It does not always stay. Because when two old souls meet, it's rarely at the same level of remembering. I once sat with a Sagittarius woman in her late 40s who had carried a single connection in her heart for over 2 decades. We only dated for 3 months, she said. But no one has ever seen me the way he did. And sometimes when I dream I see his eyes, not as they were, but as if I knew them long before this life. She was not holding on to a person. She was holding on to a recognition, a sacred familiarity that told her for a moment she was completely known. This is the soul contract of a Sagittarius. You love in such a way that others find parts of themselves they had buried. You are not here to offer shallow affection. You are here to offer mirrors. And the problem is, not everyone is ready to be seen. So they run. Not from you but from their own reflection. And it hurts, Sagittarius. Because when you love, you offer your whole self. Not just your laughter and light, but your wounds, your stories, your spiritual roadmap. You don't know how to halfway connect. You either leap fully into the fire or you walk away entirely. And often you've had to walk away. There was someone, wasn't there? Someone you let into the part of you that you usually guard with jokes or silence. They didn't just touch your body. They touched the part of you that stands between fire and freedom. And maybe it ended. Maybe it never began. But they live in your story like a soft flame that never quite goes out. And some nights when the world is quiet, you still feel them. Not as longing, but as presence. As if a piece of their soul never left. In astrology, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, the planet of expansion, philosophy, and soul wisdom. So it makes sense that your heart doesn't just love for comfort. It loves for evolution. Your connections must take you somewhere. They must teach, transform, and inspire. You don't seek fairy tales. You seek soul ignition. You need a partner who is also a seeker. Someone who sees love not as a place to hide, but as a launchpad to your greater purpose. And that's why shallow relationships can never hold you. You may try, but you always feel the absence of depth. You always feel the absence of truth. You once believed that love would save you. Now you know real love doesn't save, it reveals. And sometimes what it reveals is that you were always whole, that your longing was never for another, but for the parts of yourself you lost trying to be lovable. But when soul love arrives, it doesn't ask you to become someone else. It calls you back to yourself. It says, here, this is who you were before the world made you shrink. You see, Sagittarius, your heart is not just a place of passion. It's a sacred temple. And not everyone deserves to sit within it. You've been generous. You've let in people who said they loved you, but only loved the fire when it kept them warm, not when it revealed their shadows. They wanted your light but not your truth. Your adventure but not your depth. Your joy but not your complexity. And still you gave. You believed. You hoped they would rise with you. But often they chose comfort over growth. And you had to keep walking. This is your burden and your blessing. You are a soul born to love beyond the temporary. You were never here for the performance of love. You came for the alchemy. And real love, the kind you dream about, is not made from grand gestures. It's made from spiritual recognition. It's the quiet moment when you realize you finally stopped shrinking. It's the gaze that says, you don't have to explain who you are because I remember you. So if you're wondering why no one has ever quite matched your fire, your truth, your vision, it's not because you're too much. It's because you are meant to wait. Not in passivity, but in preparation. You're meant to grow into the version of yourself that can hold the kind of love your soul remembers. Because that love is not ordinary. It doesn't just comfort, it catalyzes. It's not here to fix your loneliness. It's here to remind you of your divinity. And until that arrives, you will continue to walk paths alone. Not because you're unloved, but because your love is not meant to be diluted. There is a myth in every culture about the twin flame, the lost counterpart, the soul companion who appears not to complete you, but to witness the real you. In Greek philosophy, Plato called them soul halves. In the Vedic tradition, they are Atma Bandhus, soul companions bound by destiny across lifetimes. You've felt them, haven't you? In that one stranger's glance. In the fleeting encounter that changed everything. In the person you still write poems about even though the world says it's been too long. Sagittarius, the reason you remember them is because the soul does not obey time. It doesn't care about calendars or relationship statuses. It remembers what the body has forgotten. It whispers to you in dreams. It brings their name in songs. It carries the imprint of moments you never got to live, but still somehow grieve. That is not weakness. That is soul intelligence. That is the remembering of a connection that transcended the moment and became part of your mission. And here's the sacred truth. If it is meant, it will return, not to hurt you again, but to honor what was once broken. And if it does not return, it is only because the memory served its purpose, called you home, not to them but to yourself. So if right now you are standing in the in-between, still remembering someone but no longer anchored to their absence, take this as a sign that you are healing. Take this as a moment to whisper to your soul, I remember, but I am no longer waiting. I bless what was. I trust what's coming. Because what's coming, Sagittarius, is not a repeat. It is a rebirth. It is not the old love returning with new words. It is a new kind of love born from the ashes of everything you thought love was supposed to be. And this time it won't ask you to prove yourself. This time it will recognize the fire in your eyes and bow. Not in worship, but in remembrance. Because your soul was never looking for a partner. It was calling home someone who could remember the vow you made before this life began. And if that person finds you in this lifetime, it will not be a beginning. It will be a continuation, a return, a rising flame that says, finally, you are seen. Gate for the Great Awakening. Sagittarius, and the moment you finally stop shrinking. There is a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the soul can no longer pretend. When the laughter feels forced, the routine grows heavy, and the dreams you used to tiptoe around suddenly rise like thunder. Sagittarius, you've always been a seeker. Not just of answers, but of meaning, of realness, of something vast enough to contain the wildness of your spirit. But somewhere along the way, life asked you to tone it down, to settle, to fold your wings and act like you weren't born to fly. And you tried. For love, for safety, for belonging. You made yourself smaller in spaces that couldn't hold your fire. You quieted your truth so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You carried dreams like contraband, hidden beneath the fabric of your daily smile. But now, something in you is breaking free. Not violently, not in rebellion, but with the soft, unstoppable force of a river remembering its course. You are awakening, Sagittarius, not because you decided to, but because your soul simply refuses to live asleep anymore. This awakening isn't always beautiful at first. It's messy, lonely. It shows up as restlessness in the middle of the night, tears that don't make sense, a strange craving for silence or change. You may find yourself withdrawing from people who once felt like home. You may question every role you've played, every belief you've clung to. You may feel guilty for wanting more, even though you've outgrown the old version of your life. This is not a breakdown. This is your soul breaking through. I once met a Sagittarius man who worked in finance for 15 years. He was good at it, respected, comfortable, but something kept whispering in his chest, a longing he couldn't name. I'd go to work, he said, and feel like I was watching myself live someone else's life. One day he quit without a plan. He moved to Peru for 6 months, sat with silence, learned to listen again. When he returned, he didn't restart his old life. He built a new one from truth. He became a grief counselor, guiding others through emotional terrain he himself had once feared to cross. It was never really about leaving my job, he told me. It was about returning to my soul. Sagittarius, that return is what's calling you now. You don't need to burn everything down. You don't need to leave everyone behind. But you do need to stop betraying yourself. You do need to stop explaining your light to people who only see you as too much. You do need to stop waiting for permission to become who you already are. This awakening asks you to look in the mirror and say, I choose myself. Even if it means letting go of what once felt familiar. It asks you to love without losing yourself. To dream without apologizing. To believe in your vision even if no one else understands it yet. And that's the hard part, isn't it? The in-between. When you've outgrown the old, but the new hasn't fully arrived. When your soul is wide open, but your life still feels too tight. That's where courage is forged. Not in the dramatic leaps, but in the quiet daily choice to honor your truth. To show up as your whole self even when it feels like too much. To stop hiding your brilliance in rooms that reward modesty over honesty. You are not here to play small, Sagittarius. You are here to expand everything you touch. The universe didn't give you this fire so you could use it to warm everyone else while you freeze inside. It didn't give you this vision so you could explain it to people committed to misunderstanding you. You were given this heart, this wild, wide-open Sagittarius heart, to stretch the world into something more alive, more real, more holy. And maybe that's why your awakening has taken so long. Because first you had to outgrow every lie. You had to learn the cost of shrinking. You had to sit in the silence of compromise and realize no applause is worth the loss of your own soul. But now you know. Now you feel it in your bones. That this is it. This is the moment you stop waiting. This is the season you begin again. Not from scratch, but from truth. This is where you meet yourself fully. Without masks. Without filters. Without fear of being too loud, too ambitious, too passionate, too honest. Because the world needs exactly that version of you, the unedited one. In astrology, Sagittarius is often called the sign of expansion and higher wisdom. But what most people forget is that true expansion is not about more, it's about real. You don't expand by adding things to your life. You expand by shedding what no longer fits. You expand by releasing the roles you were never meant to play. You expand by choosing alignment over approval. So what will you release, Sagittarius? Will you release the story that says you must always be strong? Will you release the fear that if you outshine others, you'll be abandoned? Will you release the guilt that rises when you want something more? Something sacred, something wild? Because behind every spiritual awakening is a personal revolution. And yours has already begun. You're not crazy for wanting to leave the job that pays well but drains your soul. You're not selfish for needing solitude when everyone expects you to be the light. You're not dramatic for ending relationships that no longer inspire your growth. You are simply done betraying your inner compass. This is your liberation. Not just from expectations but from your own patterns. From the ways you once dimmed your intuition just to be understood. From the habits that kept you safe but never made you free. From the noise of a world that celebrates surface while your soul aches for depth. And yes, it may get lonely. Not everyone will celebrate your return to truth. Some will call it selfish. Some will call it unstable. But the ones who are meant to walk with you, they will call it beautiful. They will recognize the fire in your eyes and say, I see you, and I remember this light. So if your chest feels heavy, if your dreams are louder than your logic, if you've been waking up with a strange grief you can't explain, know this. You are not broken. You are being reborn. The world is shifting. And your soul, your ancient, radiant Sagittarius soul, is rising to meet the call. You've been brave in survival. Now be brave in becoming. Write it down if you feel it in your bones. I no longer fear awakening. I welcome it. Because this awakening will not take from you. It will return you to yourself. Conclusion. You were never meant to shrink. You were meant to rise. Sagittarius, if you've listened with your heart, not just your ears, then something within you has already begun to move. Through each gate, we've traveled not into fantasy, but into your truth. You've remembered the weight of invisible sacrifices. You've seen the traps that masquerade as care. You've touched the ache of longing for a love that doesn't ask you to become smaller. And finally, you stood in the quiet tremble of your own awakening, not because someone else gave you permission, but because your soul refused to remain silent. This is not just a healing. It is a remembering. A gentle but profound return to who you were before the world told you to shrink. And you didn't walk this journey alone. Every word, every pause, every breath was a mirror, reflecting the vastness of who you truly are. You Sagittarius are not too much. You were simply planted in a world still learning how to hold fire. And now the question is not who will love you as you rise, but will you love yourself enough not to go back? Because the time for dimming is over. The time for waiting is over. This is the moment to choose yourself. Not in rebellion, not in anger, but in deep reverence. The world doesn't need a quieter version of you. It needs the whole you. Unapologetic, wise, on fire with truth. So if this journey has stirred something inside you, write it down, not as a comment, but as a sacred decree to your own soul. I, Sagittarius, will no longer shrink to be loved. I choose to live as my whole self. And if your heart whispered yes even once, then you are already on the path. Keep going. You were never late. You were always just in time. Thank you for walking with me.